welcome to another episode of the Tell Not Show. As always, we're your hosts. This over here is Kirsha Fox, who is the newly author of newly released Son of Deception, homeschooling mom of four, and gamer.
All right. And my co-host is Julia J.K. Allen. She's an editor, author, and author coach. She is a fantasy and horror author who loves to put magic in everything. Thank you so much
Yes.
for joining us today.
And we're so super excited to welcome our guest tonight, Poppy Orion. Hello and welcome.
Hey guys.
I'm just going to read your bio real quick so we have an idea of who you are as an author. So, Poppy Orion preferred to spend her childhood in magical worlds of her favorite science fiction and fantasy authors. These worlds delighted and fascinated her, but she always felt like there was something missing. As an adult, she realized she wanted more badass female characters in her stories, women and men who were equally complex and capable. Space opera with emotionally resonant storylines, but which refused to compromise on the deep world building, science, and epic scale that she loved. She found some great stories that came close to what she was imagining, but none that truly scratched the itch. Thus, the Valmoran Chronicles were born. When not working on the latest episode of her space opera, the Valmoran Chronicles, Poppy Orion most likely has her nose in a book. Some things never change. Otherwise, she's probably playing a video game while enduring persistent snuggles from her dogs, Link and Zelda. Welcome, Poppy.
Hi.
So great to have you. I love your bio, so charming and cute too.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that, you were really looking for something in stories, and when it wasn't quite satisfactory enough, you were like, okay, that means I got to write my own.
I'll do it myself.
Yeah, I love that. Tell us a little bit about your writing journey. Like, when did you start writing and all of that fun stuff?
Okay. Well, I have been obsessed with stories my whole life. My first attempt at a manuscript, I think I was 13, and it was really bad. I don't even have it anymore. I also drafted a manuscript during Nano when I was 27. And we'll get back to that later because Nano did not work for me. And then earlier this year at 40, I drafted another novel. And each time I drafted one of these things, I learned a lot about what does and most importantly, what doesn't work for me as a writer.
Right.
And, I've had a lot of people say, well, why did you just throw those out? You should fix those. But the truth is that I just was no longer passionate about it. I'm a little ADD. Right. And so that I need it to be a little bit more immediate and new in order for it to really hold my attention. That's part of what I've learned about myself as a writer. So the Valmoran Chronicles ended up being this crazy whirlwind because it didn't even exist in my mind before October.
Oh, okay.
And it sort of popped into my mind and I kind of became obsessed with this idea of a modern space opera where there are aliens in another galaxy that have an advanced civilization that is occurring now. Because there's a lot of space operas that occur, 100 years in the future and people are interacting with another civilization. Right. But I was like, what if, because I really like modern day speculative fiction where things in our world as it is now are suddenly sort of thrown into flux and we get to imagine how we in our current society would respond to things. But I also didn't want it to be oh, look, it's another alien invasion story. So that actually, the Valmoran Chronicles is not an alien invasion story. It's more of a cosmic galactic mystery. So this popped into my head. I started delving into it. The characters started coming to life in my mind. And at first I just started writing it for fun. It wasn't something I was going to put on Vella initially. But I got about eight chapters in and mentioned it to some friends who were like, oh, I'd read that. You should put it on Wattpad. And I was like, I don't know. I don't have a problem with Wattpad, but I was like, I wonder if there's an alternative that has a stronger copyright. And that's how I found Vella. And initially I just, sucked the first few episodes up primarily so that like some people I knew could read it.
Mm-hmm.
And it became more popular than I expected. A lot of people really, really enjoyed it. In particular, people are obsessed with the characters that are in the story and the mysteries that are woven throughout this whole thing. Because you've got 8 people who are in different places at the beginning of the story, and weird things are going on, and you're trying to figure out like what is going on. And these people have their own challenges, but every single character has their own personality. They have their own struggles, their own history, and everybody has at least one character that they really, really relate to. And now there's 22 episodes. The last one just dropped this afternoon, and it's really exciting.
Wow.
It sounds fascinating.
It really does.
I know we asked questions before the show to like get an idea of what to talk about on the show, and one of the things you mentioned is that it's kind of genre bending. This,
yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I've kind of stopped describing it in my promos as genre bending because it doesn't actually give any meaningful information, but it absolutely is genre bending because there's, like I said, there's elements of like a modern day speculative fiction because there's a medical mystery that's occurring on Earth when the story opens. So on Earth, 8 months prior to when the story starts, a microbe swept the globe, except that this microbe wasn't a pathogen. It cured all human disease. Oh. And I really liked that idea because, again, I really love speculative fiction and sort of pulling that thread. Anybody can wreck humanity with a pathogen or a zombie apocalypse, right? That's easy. I wanted to see how much things would get messed up if everybody got healed. And it turns out when you start pulling on that, a lot starts getting messed up. It screws with the world economy. Things are in a recession. And since scientists haven't been able to get through the hard outer coating on this microbe, nobody knows what it is. So there's a lot of reactionism going on, reactionary behavior. But also the story opens in another galaxy where we've got Matai Veltrellin, who is the future high priest of an ancient religion. And it's the day before he's going to be ordained as the high priest. And he doesn't want to do this. He's a reluctant heir. And so we get to see this sort of almost a high fantasy setting in a sci-fi setting over there. And the Veltrellin, or the Valmorans, this alien species, they have 300 planets. They have an advanced civilization and like a socialist republic. But they also have a few people who have like superpowers. So Matai Veltrellin has the ability to chrono jump. And it's why they call him God touched. So that maybe gives you an indication. And then another storyline is about like a smuggler and an ex-gladiator and a courtesan on a little spaceship. So I call it genre bending because I've really pulled in all of the bits and pieces of lots of different types of fiction that I love and integrated them into one story.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a little bit of the heist going on, maybe, the fantasy aspects, the sci-fi, and then, of course, the mystery that they're trying to solve. Yeah, that sounds super
I think that's one of the reasons why Cloud Atlas was such a fun story is because each chapter, each story was told a completely different way with a different thing, and they just melded it together all so well.
Yes, and there are definitely some similarities now that you mention it between the Valmoran Chronicles and Cloud Atlas because maybe not as extreme. Cloud Atlas, I love it, but it's like it's very meta. It's a very meta reading experience. The Valmoran Chronicles has a meta reading experience, but it's not necessary to enjoy the story. And I did that on purpose. I wanted to make sure that when you're actually like in an episode, you're right there with the character. They have their own struggles. And then also it's revealing little pieces of the bigger story that are going on at the same time. And eventually I will tie those up really clearly in an actual episode. But for a lot of readers, what they love is that they're reading these episodes about individual characters and they're going, wait a minute, that thing happened over there. And that's a lot like what's happening here. And so what I'm actually finding is I'm only 60,000 words in, and I've had a couple of people say that they're rereading it, looking for clues. And that's a really fun experience.
You're finding those breadcrumbs.
Yes.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about your writing process?
Yeah. So I think I talked earlier about my early attempts to figure out my writing process, and it did not work. What works for me is I have a background in software architecture. That was one of my day jobs. And so somehow in that decade of working on these massive like architecture, like data software systems for corporate situations, I developed the ability to hold huge amounts of information and tie everything together in my head. And so when I started working on the Balmoral Chronicles, I was like, gosh, I should probably start outlining this thing. But what I have done instead is I walk around my house a lot and just think about things, and the characters play in my mind. They talk in my mind a lot. And I just sort of imagine like, this is where it is, this is where it's going to go. So to a large degree, I know where things are going to end a million words from now, but I don't have all of the detail filled in. Then I have Scrivener. I love Scrivener. And as I go, obviously I have folders for each of these episodes with the author's notes, and then older versions as I'm working through each episode. But I also have probably 24 placeholders that are the next 24 or so episodes. And while I'll move them around sometimes, because when you've got 8 POV characters and 3 main storylines, there's a little bit of playing with like, what order do I want to present these things in? But I'll use those to sort of placeholder out like the POVs that are coming up and the storylines that are coming up to make sure I'm spacing it out well. And if I have particular ideas like, oh, this needs to go in this scene, I'll go in and jot some notes in there. But for the most part, the actual writing for each episode occurs sequentially for me. And that works really well, because one of my bad writing habits from before was that I would tell myself, oh, I'm at a hard scene, I don't know what should happen here. And I would skip it and tell myself, oh, that's okay, I'll fill it in later. But the storylines that I write are intricate, and they're full of like things building upon one another, and they always fell apart. So that's one of the things I actually like about the serial writing process, is that it forces me to write the next piece and polish it and commit to what's going to be there. So some people say, oh my God, I could never do it. I could never do serial, because like I would hate that, being like stuck with what I wrote. But for me, it actually is something that I would put in the pro column for serials.
Yeah. And we'll get to talking about serials and how they differ from standalones and series in a second. But I did want to jump. One of the things you said before the show is that one of your strengths is characterization, and obviously like when it has to be writing like an 8 or 9 character point of view. So what does characterization mean to you, and what tips do you have for good characterization?
So I thought a little bit when I saw that question, what does good characterization look like? Good characterization to me, like the character feels real. And it's one of those things that's, it's kind of hard to put your finger on, but you know when a character isn't working, when it's just coming off as flat. But I do know how, what my particular process is for creating characters that other people feel are real. And it's a little bit unusual, I think. And that the way I actually work on getting into these characters' heads for that close POV and really getting that emotional content in there is that every single one of these 8 characters is me. And at first that sounds like, well, wait, if they're all you, how could they possibly all be so incredibly distinct? So it seems a little unusual that that's my process, but what I've done for each of the characters is I've really like taken some aspect of myself, whether it's like Violet is, she's the CTO of a startup and she's a little bit of an anarchist and she's kind of shy and doesn't like being in front of crowds. And so I took that, turned it up to 11. Aubrey works as a corporate PR strategist. And she's really bought into the American capitalist system. And she's really playing the hustle game. And she wields her sexuality kind of like armor as she goes into the battlefield of business. And so for that, I got to take that piece of myself and just crank it up to 11, add in backstory. And then when I actually go to write, I'm not like trying to be somebody else. I'm just really, really leaning into that piece of who I am, if that makes sense.
It does.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's a really interesting way of approaching it because a lot of times we talk about as writers, we do leave pieces of ourselves in different characters, whether it's good or bad pieces. But yeah, to just take that and then make it kind of the extreme.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
Well, and even my 4-armed ex-slave, ex-gladiator who's like got PTSD and is like hyper protective of people. Like we all have so many pieces of ourselves because we're complex. So you can find like some piece within yourself that really like brings those emotions up, and like a lot of it's in the body. For me, when I'm writing, like I really try to embody the emotional feelings of that character in that scene. And that's where I think a lot of that reality comes from. And it can sometimes be painful to go that deeply into your writing space. Like when you're writing something that hurts, or I was writing a scene from my character with PTSD and I was like jittery all day. But you know, these are the things we tolerate for our writing.
Sometimes I lose my train of thread because I'm still going like, wow, 4 arms, that's so cool. I get so caught up in what you're saying. I'm like, I gotta read this. This sounds so cool.
Like ridiculous elements of fantasy that I like want. I'm like, I want a big burly ex-gladiator with 4 arms, so I'm doing it.
Yeah. Right. That's awesome.
Okay, so with the serial stories, how does that different from writing a series?
Well, I don't know that I actually am an authority on this, as I've never written a series, but I have had a lot of conversations with other authors, particularly within the serial community. There's a lot of talk. Some people use like the Vella platform more to like write books that then they publish as books. And so rather than it being sort of a serial first mindset, it's actually sort of like a serial beta to book mindset. And the books are the true product in their mind. And some people go really far the other way, and it's, you know, serials are not books. Like a serial is an ongoing story. It could last forever. And for me, it's in the middle because I think really great series, any great writing is going to be hooky, right? Like that's what keeps us turning the pages. So writing that's written really well, like you're curious and you want to know what happens next and you can't stop turning the page. And so one thing that you must hit with serials is it has to be hooky. But I don't think that only serials are hooky. I think that great writing is hooky. Also, some people talk about serials just going on, and I think that that can be true, but it's not entirely accurate. I think that really great writing has arcs. I think all really great stories have arcs, and they're you know, sort of embedded within one another. And you get that with a series where you have like your main story arc for each book, but then you have certain things that you leave open over the series. And if you do it right, people get enough of a feeling of closure at the end of an arc that they keep that they're satisfied, but they want to keep going because you left some of the threads open. So for me, the Valmoran Chronicles was always going to end up in seasons. And those seasons were always going to end up in volumes that will be published as books.
Okay.
but it's not mutually exclusive, if that makes sense.
It does.
Right. I feel like a good way of explaining serials versus series, as far as like my initial understanding of them, was that like serials, the character, it's like episodic, right? It's like watching a TV show. The characters have things happen to them that like as a reader we would know about, but they don't have that big growth arc like you do in a series where the character goes from being like the bumbling, naive person who starts the journey on the quest, and then at the end of the book they're like the big seasoned tough hero.
Well, and I think for some people that's absolutely the case, particularly
Yeah.
with a lot like, and there are some genres where that flat character arc is sort of expected, like your hard-nosed detective novels. A lot of times
Right.
that
Right.
character's flat because there's episodic stuff happening. I will say that every character in the Valmoran Chronicles does have a huge character arc.
Okay.
But absolutely, like each episode is a bite-sized piece of story, and you know that they can't immediately turn the page, so you want to hook them, but also I want my readers to know that when they sit down for their weekly episode of the Valmoran Chronicles, that they can get out a glass of wine or a cup of tea, because they are going to get a bite of story that is going to be satisfying in and of itself. It's going to answer some questions and open some new ones.
That completely makes sense. There's a lot of TV shows like that, or even mangas that come out where it's periodic. I love web comics a lot, and like a lot of people post once or twice a week. So yeah, that is one way of doing things. And you can have both the flat arcs or just the big character arcs. I love how you're able to play with the medium as much as you want to make it fit you and deliver something your readers are going to come back for every week.
Well, and actually most readers now, there's like a little bit of a great debate about what TVC is most like, but people think it's a lot like Game of Thrones, which is unusual because the topic is different. There's still politics and there's multi-POV, but Game of Thrones, Firefly, The Magicians, and The Expanse are the things that people most think it's like. And so it's interesting to me that most people compare it to television shows, because in my mind, it would translate well to the screen. Now it's brand new, but in my mind, that's how it plays out.
Yeah. So what are some tips you have for people to write serials? Like you were saying, one big thing is to be hooky. I think having the reader constantly asking questions is great, but what are your tips for that?
Yeah. So practical tips. The practical tip I was given before I really started that I ignored and am still suffering for it is actually to bank episodes before you start publishing. And this one's really hard for me because as soon as I write something, I want to share it with readers because they're waiting for it. But really, I think my stress levels would be less if I had 4 to 8 episodes banked before I published. So kind of from a practical standpoint, I would say if that is something that you can do, like if you have the patience to not immediately post the story, I would definitely go that route if I were capable of it. From a story writing standpoint, I think it's going to depend a lot on knowing how you write. Some people who write serials actually write the whole thing. Like the way that they're comfortable is they write the whole thing, they put it through the editing process, and it's fully polished before they start publishing. And I can understand why some people that would be their process that they're comfortable with. Definitely find a way to edit that works for you. Serial publishing butts up against a lot of the things that are already well established in the publishing industry. Like you can't really do beta readers in the same way. It's hard, it's hard to get reviews because you can't like feed into the ARC system. But the editing in particular, find something that works for you. But definitely I would recommend making sure that you find some way to get high quality stuff out there that doesn't have the grammar mistakes and the typos and those sorts of things. Some readers will overlook it, but I don't think it's worth the taking the chance.
Right. Right. We want the story to shine on its own.
Yes.
So giving it the best opportunity to shine is the way to
Yes.
go. Yeah. I know you said you haven't written a series really yet, but like what is you talked a little bit about pros and cons of writing serials versus series or standalones. What are some of those pros and cons for you?
Oh, I never really thought of it that way because actually for me, TVC always was going to be a 7 to 10 book epic saga. Sort of not dissimilar from the way that The Expanse is an epic space opera saga, because I knew it was going to take that long to tell the story.
Okay.
So yeah, for me, it just always was sort of going to work out with this like longer arc with smaller pieces that are real similar to a television season, that like there's a particular challenge that is this part of the story that they're trying to overcome.
Okay. So what is your favorite part of writing then?
Inventing these worlds. And probably the most fun for me is figuring out like how I'm going to sequence things so that I'm teasing things out just perfectly, so that people are going to be hungry for answers, curious, and then it's going to delight them when they finally get those answers. And I love teasing things out along the way so that like some people figure this out like right at episode 8 and they'll message me, they're like, oh my god. And then other people were like episode 20 and I'm pretty sure I just pulled out the literary like sledgehammer and they're still not, they're like, I think maybe this is going on. And it's just so fun for me to see to sort of create these mysteries that people can sort of work out in their own time.
I think that's the best part of the mysteries, is the big reveal.
Yes. And TVC is not a mystery, but it sort of is, because like they're just worked into the whole thing, because that's something I really love about stories, is like just wondering what is going to happen next, what is going on here. So
all right. Do you have a least favorite part of writing?
The writing.
You're not the first person to say that. Yeah.
It probably sounds a little strange, but like my craft is not where a lot of other authors who are like cranking out these serials are, because I have a lot of friends within like the Vella community and they're like, oh yeah, I've been an editor for 20 years or whatever. And the pace or the amount of time I have to invest to get the product to where I am willing to release it is still pretty intense. It feels a lot like I'm not like so much writing as I have like this big block of stone and I'm like just smashing at it until like the thing I can see in my head comes out. So the writing is probably my least favorite part of it, but I'm confident, because I've learned other crafts in my life, that will be something that becomes easier with time.
Yeah. And you've been talking about Vella a lot. So for those who aren't familiar with the program, can you tell us a little bit about Vella and how that works?
Yeah, so Kindle Vella is Amazon's serial publishing platform, similar to like it's sort of like a paid Wattpad. I know that Wattpad also has paid stories now, but the first 3 episodes that you publish, they're kind of like chapters. They're between 6,000 and 5,000 words, although TVC's episodes are between 2 and 3, and they're on the long side for most Vellas. But the first 3 episodes are free, and then after that you use tokens to unlock the stories, and it's like 1 token for 100 words. So yeah, similar to Radish. It's a platform where people can publish on a schedule, and they publish 1 episode at a time.
Okay.
Good to know. And we like to ask this question a lot because this show is kind of geared towards newer authors. So, what is some writing advice that you felt was really helpful for you that you really liked?
That I need to pull out my notes. I think I wrote something down for this because actually most writing advice did not work very well.
Right.
So, oh yeah, okay. So I have a couple specifics, but like in general, what I would say is everyone is different. Like there will, if someone comes out and tells you like this is the right way to write, like you have to sit down and write 2,000 words a day, or you have to do this, or you have to do that, then I would say do not trust that person because what they're probably doing is telling you how writing works for them, but that won't necessarily be how writing works for you. So my best advice would be try all of those people's advice until something clicks. And eventually when you get into your own flow, it will just feel like a sigh of relief because you're like, okay, this works for me. But one really, really, really specific thing that you'll see is the recommendation to read dialogue out loud. And in particular, I know that some people, I process things in a very audio way. I actually have aphantasia and don't see images in my head. But if you don't hear voices in your head in particular, make sure you read your dialogue out loud, because a lot of early writers, that's something that can really throw people out of immersion, is when characters speak in a way that just isn't a way that people would speak.
Right. Listening in on conversations and seeing how they unravel is really another great tip too.
Oh yeah,
that goes really along with what you were saying. Yeah, because there's something about like new writers with the on the nose dialogue of remember last year during the Great War when blah 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 happened, and it's just like.
Also,
no one, that's so unnatural sounding sometimes.
If person A and person B both know something, they're not going to explain it. That's not realistic. Rework the scene.
Right. So what influences your writing?
Everything.
Good answer.
No, like there are a lot of things that influence my writing. I obviously lots of television shows and movies. I'm a huge geek, and so like I've watched most of them, and I've read things my whole life. And but also one of my majors was philosophy. I lived in Japan for a year and studied Japanese. I'm fascinated by the differences in the norms between different cultures. I'm interested in sociology. I'm just like a big nerd who's really interested in lots and lots of things. I'm interested in pandemics. So the Valmoran Chronicles really came out of this like soup of all of the things I ever thought were interesting.
Right. But they always say like there's no such thing as original story, but I feel like that's how original stories are made nowadays, is just like you said, it's a mixture, it's a combination, it's putting together multiple things that you enjoy.
There's nothing new. Like there's nothing that is truly new. But there are novel combinations of things that are familiar. And honestly, I think when people try to get so far out there that they're like, I'm going to make something so new, like how are people going to relate to that? Like it's the recombination of the familiar in a new way that feels novel.
Right. 100% agree.
Where do you find your daily inspiration to write?
Inspiration. Okay. Well, one thing about being a serial novelist, I guess I'm a serial novelist. That's true. It's still so new. Is I'm on social media a lot, and I had spent a decade off of social media because it was very bad for my ADD. But you can't really write without being on social media. So I've got a Discord server. I've got the Facebook server. People can leave comments on each episode in Vella. And a lot of my inspiration to write comes from like the little wins. Like the other day I just did like a happy dance because I checked episode 21, which was the latest one at the time, and someone who I didn't know, it was like not someone I knew was a fan, they're not in the Discord server or following me on Facebook, left a comment like, "Oh no, I'm all out, write faster."
Ah,
Like,
that's a great comment to get. Yeah.
I mean, that's fantastic. That
Mhm.
made my day. So just knowing that people are out there and they're like hungry for the next piece of the story and that they're enjoying it and that I'm able to entertain them,
Mhm.
that gives me probably most of my inspiration.
I totally get this. I am completely addicted to the comments that I get from my beta readers, my ARC readers, anyone who's read my book. I'm like, tell me, like, I want to see your face when you open it, you know? Like,
Yes, yes.
Right.
And I'm like, oh, what about that part? And like,
yes.
you
Right.
never get as much, like, I want to stand over their shoulder and be like creeping on them, like, how are they going to react to this reveal?
Right, when they get
But
to
that
that
would be very
part, yeah.
creepy.
I'm glad you recognize that, because I feel like there's some authors that don't have the boundaries they should. So yes, we must. Yeah, it's good to know that like we're not really going to stand over a reader's shoulder.
Yes.
No, we're not
We
actually
promise.
going to do
Yeah.
We'd
this.
really like to.
But I make sure to tell my readers all the time, like,
Mhm.
you are not bothering me. If you like get done with an episode and you hated something or you liked it, like,
Mhm.
I don't care. Like, I want to know, like, how did this
Right.
hit for you?
Right.
And that's the other thing about serials that is way different, actually, than publishing. And that is, like, just last week, I completely rewrote episode 1, like 80% new prose.
Oh.
And moved the camera around. The events of the day are the same, but I changed everything about how that was presented so that I could better hit, because I had gotten feedback from critiquers and from readers on
Nice.
various things that like didn't make sense, or just everything, and just reimagined the scenes so that it would just be hookier and better paced and
Mhm.
better ground people in this fantastic world. So that's something that's really different about serials, is that if you want to, you can rewrite things as you get feedback so that the
Right.
next round of readers coming in have an even smoother experience.
Mhm.
So it's kind of
Mhm.
always in beta, is how I think of it.
Mhm.
Right. Right. No, that's a nice benefit, is that you are getting feedback that you can immediately incorporate. Yeah. So, do you believe in writer's block, and how do you deal with it?
I believe that there are many things that can get in the way of
Mhm.
progressing. So in that way, I believe in writer's block. I don't believe that there is writer's block. I think it's such a non-specific term as to not really be useful, because when people give you advice for how to get through writer's block, I think it matters what is causing your writer's block. I think that
Right.
matters a lot, like what the solution is. So sometimes writer's block means you're flirting with burnout and you're
Right.
exhausted. You need to take care of your body, or mental overwhelm. I think a lot of times people don't understand just how much mental overwhelm crushes creativity. So sometimes it really is better, rather than the standard advice for writer's block is just keep writing. In some cases, just keeping writing, I think, can actually keep you in it, depending on who you are. Like, sometimes it's just procrastination. And if it's just procrastination and you can like figure out that that's what you're doing, then that is the one time I think just keep writing is actually really good advice, because sometimes you just need to get in it. But I also think that sometimes writer's block actually means you need to do more research because you don't know what the scene is supposed to do. So sometimes, and that's the one piece of advice a lot of experienced writers will be like, don't do more research. That's just another way to procrastinate. But it's not always another way to procrastinate, especially if you're writing anything that's like got science fiction in it, or you've got world building, or maybe you haven't fleshed out your character enough, so you don't know what they would do next, and so you feel like you have writer's block. Maybe you need to like develop your character a little more. do some exploratory writing with that character in an
Right.
unusual circumstance to find out what they would do in this new situation. And the final thing is sometimes I get writer's block that's actually writer's intuition, is what I call it. And the scene is fine, but in my gut, it's just like, no. And sometimes that lasts for like days. And then suddenly I'll wake up one day and I'm like, oh yeah, because that would have created a plot hole. So
Gotcha.
so I think it's a lot about like learning your own signals. Like, what is this particular writer's block telling me?
I completely agree with you on that. Whenever I get really stuck, it's
Mhm.
like the first sign to me that I've taken a wrong turn. I need to back
Right.
up and
Mhm.
figure out what I should do instead.
And sometimes you can't force it. Sometimes it just takes like time for it to like work through your mind
Right.
and click. So, which can be tough when you have a new episode coming out every week and you do not have episodes
Oh
banked.
no.
So I do
Right.
actually have a plan to get ahead.
Right. So have you had any significant writing victories yet that you feel good about?
So for me, the things that I actually get really excited about, I was mentioning, are like just the comments I get from readers when they're like, oh my God, I love Vi. Or, whatever it is that they just got joy from reading it. That's what I get really fired up about. But
Right.
also, the Valmoran Chronicles is the number one space opera on Kindle Vella. It is number 4 in all of science fiction and number 16 in all of fantasy.
Yeah.
And it's been up for just a couple months. So that's, I don't know, that's pretty cool.
I would definitely
Congratulations.
writing victory. Wow.
For sure. Congratulations on that, because
Thanks.
that is a feat. Yeah. What is your favorite book, or who is your favorite author and why?
That's like asking me to pick my favorite kid.
I know. It's so hard.
I only have one
yeah.
child. But there's a couple that I have to pick because of like childhood memories. One is I read the Chronicles of Narnia so many times as a kid that I actually wore out 2 sets. So that sort of fantastic portal fantasy sort of thing. There are definitely elements of that in the Valmoran Chronicles as well, because I loved those stories growing up. But also, of course, the Lord of the Rings. But for me, it's not just like, oh yeah, because everybody says the Lord of the Rings. My dad read all 4 of them aloud to me when I was in 6th and 7th grade. Every single night, and he did the voices and everything. And so he traveled a lot for work, so that was a pretty significant and special thing in my childhood. So I'm always going to have a soft spot for that. But more modern, I really like N.K. Jemisin. She wrote the 5th season, which is it's a sci-fi, but I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. It's sci-fi, but it's much more character driven.
Okay.
Sci-fi.
Yeah, I prefer the character driven stories myself too, because that's what we relate and connect to as the characters.
Right.
Rather than explosions and all that.
Yeah. Well, and like you can have it drives me crazy when it seems like science fiction authors just want to seem smart.
Right.
Like the world building and the science in the Valmoran Chronicles is absolutely well researched. I spend hours on it. And almost none of it makes it onto the page because it's boring.
Right. That's for us to inform our writing that actually makes it
exactly. It's sprinkled in there, but like I don't want people to feel dumb when they read. Like this is for fun.
I pay to read for a science fiction author, and I'm like, hey, this chapter where you're describing the building and the architecture, and this is really fascinating, but it's doing nothing for your plot. It's not moving anything forward. It has nothing to do with your story. You need to cut it. And like, it was really hard because it was actually like really interesting, but it
wasn't. But yeah, pacing matters more.
The
story matters more. So like if I get to a point where I have more than about 2 paragraphs of backstory, introspection, you name it, like it's going to get chopped to pieces, reimagined. It's going to get worked into dialogue. Because if it doesn't matter to my character right now,
Right.
then it doesn't get headspace in the book,
Right.
because everything I write is a close POV.
All right. So we asked about writing advice that you love. Is there writing advice that you don't like?
The writing advice I do not like in particular, because it does not work for me, is oh, you don't know what's going to happen next, or you feel like you have writer's block. It's okay. Just keep writing. And you know, there's something to be said for people who spend a lot of time reading about writing and never spend any time actually writing. And you have to write to be a writer. That is true. But just keep writing doesn't always help you like figure out plot holes or characterization or, you know, any number of things. And so for me, like NaNoWriMo was a really great exercise. It taught me two things. One, I can write significantly more words in a day than I ever thought possible. So just knowing that was possible was valuable, because it broke me past like, oh, you know, I'm going to be like a Hemingway who can only write 250 words a day or whatever.
Right.
I blasted right through that, had a 10,000 word day, and realized you can write a lot more than you think you can. The other thing that was really valuable from Nano for me was learning that to just write through things actually does not work. It's a great way for me to end up with lots and lots of hot garbage.
All right. We do like to give you the opportunity to tell us where we can find you online, where your social media and all that. And then if you have anything exciting you would like to announce, now's the time.
Yeah. So I actually just got the first version of my website up like 2 days ago. ValmoranChronicles.com, ValmoranChronicles.com, and PoppyOrion.com will all redirect to it. There's a full-length book trailer there, some character bios, and some reviews for now, and a link to Vella. Also, if you type in the Valmoran Chronicles in Google, the first link that will pop up is a link to my Amazon story page, and you can read it there. I'm also on TikTok, and from the link tree in my TikTok, you can get to my Discord server. That link isn't up on the website yet. The socials aren't there, but they will be soon. The Discord server is my preferred place to hang out with fans, and I absolutely am in there every day. And that's one of the cool things about still being a new author, is that I don't have such an overwhelming number of super fans that I can't talk to anyone at any point in time. I still have time to do it. And I love it. It's one of my favorite things to do. And I guess the other news that's still a ways out, but the first volume of the Valmoran Chronicles will be coming out in book form this fall, because I'm already halfway done writing it, which is absolutely crazy. But yeah, with the 22 episodes that are out so far, half of the story is finished for the first book.
That's exciting.
That's super exciting. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and we want to thank our listeners as well. Make sure you join us next time, where we welcome our next guest for episode 12. There's always more than one way up a mountain, and if you are interested in being on our show, you can find us on social media at The Tell Not Show, or you can email us at thetellnotshow@gmail.com. Thank you so much. And thank you again, Poppy.
Thanks again for listening. If you enjoyed the show, consider subscribing and liking. We appreciate all the support. Julia J.K. Allen is an author, editor, and coach, and can be found at hijinksrudder.com.
Kirsha Fox is an author, avid reader, gamer, and mother to 4, and you can find her at KirshaFox.com. Thanks, and see you next time.